The New York Mets just shook up their core in a major way, trading the longest tenured Met, Brandon Nimmo. Now, the question is, what's next?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to be talking about the Brandon Nimmo trade. In the first segment, I want to spend some time on the guy that the Mets are getting in the trade, Marcus Semien. How will he upgrade the Mets at second base? Will he upgrade the Mets to second base? We're going to go through that. Second segment, I want to talk about who could get traded next. Is this the first of many moves to shake out the Mets core? And then we're going to close out the show in the final segment talking about who will replace Brandon Nimmo out in left field. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com. where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. All right, so for those of you who missed the news last night, Brandon Nimmo got traded to the Texas Rangers in exchange for Marcus Semien. The Mets are also sending $5 million in cash to offset some of the money in the deal, or as according to John Heyman. My assumption would be that $5 million is probably going to come at the end of the deal to try to offset some of the money at the back end of the contract, because over the next 3 years, the New York Mets are actually going to be paying Marcus Semien more than they would be paying Brandon Nimmo. Semien is owed $72 million over the next 3 years, a $26 million salary over the next 2 seasons, then $20 million in the final year of his deal in 2028, which does mean that last year would be a little more expendable if it got to that point. But the bottom line here is the Mets are removing Brandon Nimmo's contract from the books for the next 5 years, and they're taking on Semien for 3. Nimmo is owed $102.5 million. He makes $20.5 million a season. So for the next 2 years, they're going to be paying $5.5 million more for Semien. The final year of the deal is when the money pretty much does offset. Granted, who knows when that $5 million gets kicked in, but enough of the money. I did a show right after the trade happened to give you my gut raw reaction. So if you're looking for the Mets fan in me that, like you guys, might be feeling sad about this trade and was sort of mourning the loss of Nimmo, that's the show where you can find that. This is supposed to more be a podcast today where we are looking ahead. And the first part of this deal that we have to focus on is not even Nimmo's absence from the Mets. It's the fact that all of a sudden, Marcus Semien is your everyday second baseman. If there's one thing that Semien's going to bring to the table, unless he fouls a ball off his foot, which he did in August this past year, costing him the final month of the season, this is one of the most durable players in baseball. So he is going to be in the lineup every day at second base. And so what you're getting here is not a replacement for Brandon Nimmo. That we're going to talk about in the final segment. That's still to be determined. This is replacing Jeff McNeil, Luisangel Acuña, and Brett Beatty from this past season, who are the consistent guys playing second base. And so if you look at it that way, I think the trade starts to get a little bit easier to stomach. And that's why I had the raw reaction to the trade, and then I have me recording this after midnight, 6+ hours after the deal, when I've had time to think about it, read about it, and just try to process it. And so that's where I landed at. The Mets are getting better at second base. They are. This is a 3-time All-Star, 2-time Silver Slugger, although those days are probably way behind him at this point, but a 2-time Gold Glover who just won a Gold Glove this past season. You want to improve your defense? Having Francisco Lindor and Marcus Semien up the middle, that is one of the best double play combinations in baseball. And the athleticism is not really going anywhere with Semien. At least he hasn't shown a decline necessarily. You can look at the bat speed stuff maybe, but when you're just talking about the defense, yes, the range numbers were a bit down this past season because outs above average in 2024 for Marcus Semien was 19. This past season, his outs above average was 7. So there was a decline there, but you also missed, probably 6 months of more accumulation for Semien to have added on to those numbers a little bit. And also, I just look at the guy's sprint speed. He averaged 28.5 miles per hour this past year for a sprint speed. And so that right there is pretty much the same sprint speed that we've seen from him the last 4 or 5 years. So he hasn't really lost a step defensively, I don't believe. And if he has, it's not a big one. He's still going to be an upgrade over Jeff McNeil over there, especially just looking at the full picture of what you're getting with Marcus Semien. This is a high IQ player, former shortstop, who brings leadership qualities to the clubhouse and just a new dynamic. If the Mets wanted to change things up, you're removing the guy that was your longest tenured player. So that is going to shift the dynamics of that clubhouse. If everyone was kind of turning towards Nimmo because it was his team, he was the guy who had been there the longest, now maybe a little bit more of that leadership falls on Francisco Lindor, and you get more attention going that way. Maybe Marcus Semien brings a new perspective at 35 years old. So there's that side of this as well. Offensively, if you're trying to, again, take Nimmo's production and weigh it against Semien, this is a bad trade. But you have to instead look at Semien's production compared to what the Mets got out of second base this past year. The Mets second baseman this past season, altogether, all of them, they hit 237. Marcus Semien hit 230. They got on base at a 305 clip. Marcus Semien got on base at a 305 clip. They slugged at a 367 clip. Semien slugged at a 364 clip. So you're basically looking at a very similar baseline production. If Semien is going to at least replicate what he did this past season, your offense at second does not take a step back. And actually, when it comes to run production, Semien is a high contact hitter. He does not strike out much. He drove in 62 runs and scored 62 runs in 127 games. The second base position for the Mets drove in 52 and scored 70 in more games, in 35 more games. Also home runs, 15 for Semien, 14 for Mets second baseman, 15 stolen bases for Mets second baseman, and Acuña is part of that. 11 for Semien. Really, Semien's going to give you more on the bases than you were getting from McNeil and Beatty. Obviously, Acuña, different story, but Acuña was not going to be your starting second baseman anyway. Yes, he would give you the same defense as Semien, maybe even better because of the age difference and more speed, but the bat, you're going to get 15 to 20 home runs at least, you would figure, from Semien. And the other component of this is a hitter that pulls the ball in the air very well. That is, when he's at his best, Marcus Semien's pulling a bunch of home runs. And it's easier to do that at Citi Field than it is at Globe Life and Texas. If you look at his expected home runs by park, this is a stat that StatCast gives you where it takes all the batted balls and just puts them in each ballpark. It tells you how many home runs a player would hit if all of their games were played in that one park. In 2025, if Semien played all of his games at Citi Field, he'd have 17 home runs compared to 14 in Texas. And overall, he actually hit 15. 10 of them were on the road this past year. Only 5 of them were hit with the Rangers or in the Rangers ballpark. In 2024, it's pretty remarkable. His expected home runs by ballpark in Texas was 21. At Citi Field, it was 33. So a massive difference there. If Marcus Semien can get into that pull side power and he can pop you 20 home runs this year, maybe even 25 home runs this year, while giving you a great glove at second base, even if he's only hitting 230 instead of 270 when he was at his best a couple years ago, even if he's only getting on base at that 305 to 310 clip instead of the 340 to 350 clip he was a couple of years ago, you are still getting solid production at second base that is at least what you were going to get with a bunch of different guys, with McNeil, with Acuña, with Beatty. Doesn't account for the Jett Williams side of this, which we'll talk about more in the next segment, because you have a top prospect that could be your second baseman of the future. Now someone's clogging the position for the next 3 years. But I think this is a trade where the New York Mets decided we want to move on from Nimmo because we want to change up the clubhouse. And also we want to, and it's not that Nimmo's a bad clubhouse guy. It's about just changing the Mets at their core, trying to be a different team and not just running it back again. Also, you are freeing up future spending. Your future payroll is not as locked up. Marcus Semien is owed $72 million over the next 3 seasons. And I think the Mets really like the idea of Semien as their starting second baseman in 2026. Now, you remove $26 million after this season from that total. All of a sudden, now Marcus Semien's owed $46 million over 2 seasons. If it doesn't work, you can get out of that a lot easier than it would have been to try to get out of 4 years of Brandon Nimmo if things didn't work in 2026. You also have the fact that Brandon Nimmo had plantar fasciitis. He had a neck injury that both of those injuries are just career-long things he has to manage. He did a remarkable job staying on the field. I'm not saying that Brandon Nimmo was a durability question in 2026, but long-term, you had to wonder in a lot of ways, even though you're getting an older player, you are mitigating a lot of back-end risk. And I think that's ultimately one of the driving forces in this trade. It's about the fact that they've probably believed that they had to get a second baseman this offseason. They were linked to Brandon Donovan. There was, of course, the Ketel Marte stuff that was in the background. Didn't think that was necessarily going to happen. But if they felt like they needed to get a starting second baseman this offseason, they accomplished that, and they move off of Brandon Nimmo, which might have been another one of the things that they decided as a front office that they wanted to do to change up this team for next season. It's a bold move, but I respect the fact that the New York Mets are trying to do something different, trying to really change up this roster. I didn't love it when it first happened. There's still part of me that doesn't love Marcus Semien as the Mets second baseman. And there's still the fan side of me that sentimentally doesn't love the idea of Brandon Nimmo on another team. That's like, oh man, Brandon Nimmo's a Ranger. He doesn't get to have that storybook ending with the New York Mets. It would have felt so good for Brandon Nimmo to win a World Series with the Mets uniform on and have that number 9 retired. That's all gone. But this is a front office that wanted to get better defensively, and this is the first move in doing that. And now the question is going to be, what comes next? Does this mean Jeff McNeil gets traded? Does this mean a top prospect like Jett Williams gets traded? I want to talk about the impact of this move on other players on the Mets roster, so we're going to do that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Put that $5 bet down. If it hits, you're getting $300 in bonus bets. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're almost there. I'd love to be there by the end of the year. Really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, when Marcus Semien was announced as the player coming back for Brandon Nimmo, I think everyone's gut reaction to the trade was, all right, well, Jeff McNeil's a goner. He was already on the block. He just picked up a second baseman. Jeff McNeil will get traded. I would not jump right to that conclusion. And the funny thing is, I actually did, just like all of you. Go back, listen to the live stream right after the news broke. I am pretty positive I made a comment that Jeff McNeil is probably going to get traded next. Now I've had time to think about it. I don't know if the Mets are going to be quick to trade Jeff McNeil. For one, let's say the Mets strike out getting a corner outfielder. Jeff McNeil is your starting left fielder now. Jeff McNeil is the Brandon Nimmo replacement. We're going to talk about the Brandon Nimmo replacement more in the final segment today, but having Jeff McNeil in place is still a nice floor just in case your offseason does not go as planned. Also, right now, the Mets are in some ways counting on Carson Bench to be a big part of their outfield. Jeff McNeil hedges that a little bit. At first base, Jeff McNeil is an option. A good one? Not really, but still, could he play a good defensive first base? Absolutely. And I think what Jeff McNeil gives this team is a guy that is your first man off the bench at so many different spots and a left-handed bat off the bench. Try to find that player in free agency that can do what Jeff McNeil can for the 2026 New York Mets. Who's the player? Is it Willie Castro? Is it Isaiah Kiner-Falefa? These are the different options that are on the table, and none of them are as good as Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil, if he was on this market right now, he would be the second best second baseman on the market behind Jorge Polanco. Now that Gleyber Torres signed the qualifying offer. If Jeff McNeil was a free agent in this market, he would be a top 5 corner outfielder probably. There's not a lot of good ones. You got Kyle Tucker, you got Cody Bellinger, and then it falls off a cliff. Then you're talking about Austin Hayes and Max Kepler, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a name or two, but you're not Mike Yastrzemski. I mean, there's some guys, but not really very many good ones. So Jeff McNeil, yes, the salary is bloated. He shouldn't be getting paid $15.75 million if he's coming off your bench. But if you're just going to eat the money to trade him, I don't know if the Mets are just going to do that. I think in this deal, they didn't just eat the cash to move Nimmo. They believe in Marcus Semien as a player. If they're going to get back a piece that helps them in 2026, if they can trade Jeff McNeil for a high leverage reliever, yeah, they'll do that. If they can trade Jeff McNeil for a corner outfielder in some way or another piece that makes more sense or a prospect that they really like, I guess. But I ultimately actually am starting to come around to the idea that maybe Jeff McNeil sticks around because he's not a bad bench bat. He's really not. As your starting second baseman, I get trying to upgrade. Well, you theoretically just did that by getting Marcus Semien. So in some ways, I actually think this makes McNeil almost less likely to get traded because now there's also not that layer of, well, we just can't bring back this same core, but we want to re-sign Pete. So now we're going to go right back into it again with Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor. We got to do something different. Okay, McNeil's an expiring contract. Let's trade him so we're different. And now you're really different. Now you don't have Nimmo. So all of a sudden, I actually think that in some ways, maybe McNeil sticks around. I'm not saying, oh, he's not getting traded. If the deal's right, they'll move him. I just don't think we're going to see the trade. And look, I could be wrong. I said last week the Mets weren't going to trade Nimmo. So it doesn't mean that I'm 100% confident and right in this. But I don't know if I see the Jeff McNeil gets traded to the Athletics plus $7 million in cash to just get rid of him. I just don't think that that's the move that the Mets make at this point, the more that I sort of chew on where they're at and how this impacts everybody. Instead, I think the guy that's now most likely to get traded is actually Luisangel Acuña, because Acuña does not have an option. So you can't put him in Syracuse. Ronnie Mauricio still has an option. The Mets made that choice after the trade deadline. They had to pick between one of those two guys to preserve an option. They kept Ronnie Mauricio on the big league club to keep that option. And now Mauricio makes more sense to stick around because of that option and because he provides you with insurance at a lot of positions. He can be in Syracuse as your third baseman in waiting. He can be your backup shortstop. He can be your backup second baseman in waiting in Syracuse. He can maybe play a little bit of first base when he's down there just to see what that looks like. He can DH for you. So now I think Ronnie Mauricio has roles all over the place, and because of that option, it makes sense to keep him. For Acuña, you can't send him to Syracuse, so he has to be on your big league roster. What's his role? Pinch runner, and what else? He was a defensive replacement at second base. That's out the window. Semien's going to be playing every inning. So now what do you do with Acuña? Is he your answer in center field? Probably not. So I think Acuña is actually the guy that's most likely to be traded. I think it'd be pretty easy to move him. He doesn't make anything. He's pre-arb. He doesn't have any options, but he can play all over the field. And if you have a team that doesn't have a shortstop, you can stick Acuña at shortstop every day. He'll be a plus defender there, and he'll give you some more output just from the glove alone, and you see if he'll end up hitting. I think that Acuña is going to get traded now. I really do. Beyond that, you do have to wonder about Jett Williams. This trade does make him more expendable. Now, you're not just going to shop Jett Williams to shop Jett Williams. Depending on the outlet, you're looking at a top 50, top 40 prospect in baseball. I still am very high on Jett Williams, and part of why I didn't like this trade initially is because I really was envisioning, Jett Williams at some point this upcoming season forcing himself into the picture at second base. That could still happen. I think this more likely keeps Jett Williams in Syracuse for all the 2026 season. But it also means that if you are potentially making a trade for a starting pitcher, well, all right, now Jett Williams is a little more expendable in that deal because you have a second baseman in place for the next couple of years. And if you value AJ Ewing more as a potential center fielder, maybe you want to hold on to Ewing, and Jett is the prospect that you're willing to put out there to headline a trade. So I do think that this does make Jett Williams more expendable, but you don't have to trade him. And I think it's pretty clear from the way David Stearns answered that question about Jett Williams at the GM meetings that he did not view him as a piece for the early part of the 2026 season. He wasn't even asked about Carson Bench. He was asked about the center field situation, and David Stearns himself offered Carson Bench is going to have a chance to make our team in spring training. So that was how he views Bench when asked, will Jett Williams have a chance to win a spot? It's like, oh, I'm not going to close the door on anybody, but we'll see. It was very much saying, yeah, Jett's not ready. And that's fine. You can have Jett Williams at 22 years old, spend a full season at AAA getting better as a player. And then once you get to the end of 2026, when now Marcus Semien is only owed $46 million over 2 more years, you then see where you're at. If Semien just has an awful season, well, at some point, maybe Jett still does take that second base job. Then it ends up being a bad trade because now you got worse money on your books. But regardless of any of that, there's still future opportunities for Jett Williams. It just does make it a little bit easier to stomach trading him because that clear path that he had at second base, that's now jammed up. But again, Jett Williams could be your center fielder instead of AJ Ewing. You could have Bench and right. So there's still other ways to play it. Here's what we know about the 2026 New York Mets. Brett Baty is your starting third baseman. Francisco Lindor is your starting shortstop. Marcus Semien is your starting second baseman. Francisco Alvarez is your starting catcher. Juan Soto is starting in one of the outfield spots. And I also think that we know that Carson Bench is going to be starting in another one of those outfield spots. It might not be on opening day, but the Mets are going to expect that Carson Bench is a huge part of their team in 2026. First base could be Alonso, could be Vientos, or it could be an outside addition. DH could be Alonso, could be Vientos, could be an outside addition. The third outfield spot is either Jeff McNeil or an outside addition. And then your bench, if you do make that outside addition, Jeff McNeil is the first guy off the bench. You got Tyrone Taylor as your fourth outfielder, giving you great defense and center and speed to do some of those pinch running opportunities that you might have given to Acuña. And then you got Luis Torrens as your backup catcher. That's a really good start of a bench. All you need is to add one more bat into the picture, and it very well could just be Ronnie Mauricio. You got a pretty interesting group. I think it all hinges on what you do in that final outfield spot, but there is the makings of a really complete team here if the Mets replace Nimmo properly. And that's where we're going to close the show. Who's the bat that they get to stick into a corner outfield spot? We're going to go through it all to close things out in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. The NBA season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the arena surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between the queues, login screens, and prices that jump at checkout, it can get frustrating. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast. It's easy. It's backed by the Game Time guarantee, so you're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price, plus all fees are included. So the price that you see is the price that you pay. The app made it super simple. You can actually view your receipt before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can get tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps. You're all set. It's honestly the fastest, cheapest, and least stressful way that I've ever used to get a ticket to a game. So if you want to go to a game, download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, download Game Time today. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. We get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways and get the live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's get to the final component of this, which is sort of bearing the lead, and that's the fact that Brandon Nimmo is no longer going to be in the Mets outfield, and that is a lot of production they have to replace. Brandon Nimmo has become a really good run producer where you could count on 20 to 25 homers and 75 to 90 RBIs. He cleared 90 RBIs the last 2 seasons. So you are losing a component to that outfield that is not easy to replace. If Brandon Nimmo was a free agent, he would be the third best corner outfielder. So there is something to be said about the fact that it's not going to be easy to just get a plug-and-play replacement in the corner outfield spot. You don't even have another top prospect outside of Carson Bench that's ready to jump into the picture, unless, of course, you're going to play Jett Williamson center, and Carson Bench is the corner outfielder. But I don't think the New York Mets are going to plan on that for opening day. They're going to have to do something else, and I don't think that that something else is just, all right, we're going to have Jeff McNeil move out to left because we got Marcus Semien now. If that was what the Mets ultimately land on throughout this offseason, it was a bad trade because you will have gotten worse offensively. And if you don't re-sign Pete Alonso, that is a ton of run production that you're losing in your lineup. That's 2 of your best 4 hitters. So the Mets still need to bring back Pete. And in some respects, a little bit easier to do that because, again, long-term money, you don't have as much tied into a core with Nimmo, Lindor, and Soto. Now it's just Lindor and Soto that are on your books with big contracts moving forward. So you can now easier add Alonso to that picture. But in the outfield, there's 2 names that everybody had at the top of their mind when Brandon Nimmo got traded. Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger. The top 2 outfielders on the market and 2 of the best bats on the market. Kyle Tucker still feels like a little bit of a pipe dream just because we don't know where that bidding is going to go. But the expectation is it's going to be north of $300 million and potentially north of $400 million. And I don't know if getting off of Nimmo, you immediately want to jump into a decade-long commitment that could be worth more than $40 million per season. I don't know. We will talk about it. We're going to do a full show on this tomorrow, really getting into these options a little bit more. This is more to just break down the names that now are more in play for the New York Mets. Cody Bellinger, to me, is the most natural fit. He could be your starting center fielder if Carson Bench isn't ready, where you can open up the year with Jeff McNeil in left, Cody Bellinger in center, and Juan Soto in right. That's one way that you can go about it. Cody Bellinger can be your right fielder, Carson Bench can be your center fielder, and Juan Soto can be in left. Soto was moved to left field by the Padres in 2024 because his defense wasn't good enough in right. In 2023. Gets traded to the Yankees in 2024. They decide to put Soto in right, Judge in center. Comes to the Mets. He remains in right field after what was a good season for him defensively in 2024. But that's because it's really easy to play right field in Yankee Stadium with that short porch. It makes it a lot easier on your right fielder. It's the opposite with the Mets. Right field is a lot more difficult to play than the left. So I think what the Mets should do here is Juan Soto should be a left fielder moving forward. I feel like Juan Soto as a left fielder, you can get away with that for at least, 3 more years. You can at least ride out the Semien contract with Soto and left. Not that Soto is going to all of a sudden play second base, but the point more is I think you are a better defensive team if Soto's in left instead of right. I think he hurts you less in left field than he does in right. I know his arm plays out in right, but that arm's going to play in left too, and you can get an even better arm in right. So I like the idea of maybe going Bellinger. He's your right fielder. Soto's your left fielder. Bench is your center fielder. If Bench isn't ready, then Jeff McNeil slides into right even because McNeil, I would just want Soto in left field. From the beginning of camp, I want Soto in left. If it's my team, my outfield. That's how I would do it because I just think he's going to be – you have a better chance of getting close to a league average defender with Soto in left than you do with him in right. So that's one side of this. Again, when you're going back to who else can join this outfield, Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger are the 2 free agent fits. if you want to go for a center fielder, there's only one guy who can be a starter in this free agent market, and that's Harrison Bader. So do you want to reunite with Bader because you really buy into the career year he had in 2025 and potentially sign into a multi-year deal because Carson Bench is going to be a right fielder and Soto's going to be in left? Is that the way the Mets go? I don't think so, because I would imagine the Mets are very high on AJ Ewing. Maybe they just think that between Ewing and Jett Williams, one of those guys is going to be their center fielder. And so I just can't see the Mets giving Harrison Bader a multi-year deal. And this guy, with the fact that he's the only starting center fielder on the market, unless you call Cody Bellinger a starting center fielder, but Bellinger has played way more in the corners than in center the last couple of years. Hasn't really played regularly in center field since I want to say 23. Regardless, I just can't see the Mets giving Bader a multi-year deal. I think he stands to get one on this market. So honorable mention Bader, but I don't think that happens. The name I would look at is Jarren Duran, because the Red Sox have an outfield glut. They got Wilyer Abreu. They got Jarren Duran. They have Ceddanne Rafaela, who was the best defender in baseball this past year in center, so he's probably going to be right back in that spot. They have Roman Anthony, their new face of the franchise, who will be starting somewhere, left or right. And they got to decide who to trade between Wilyer Abreu and Jarren Duran. They also have Christian Campbell, who's signed to a long-term deal, and the reporting was he's going to play more outfield than infield next year. So, again, a glut of outfielders. Jarren Duran makes a lot of sense for the New York Mets. I was clamoring for him at the trade deadline because he just would have been an awesome fit in center field. This is a guy that was elite defensively in 2024 in center. He was great, but they had Ceddanne Rafaela, so they decided to move Duran into left. Wasn't as good in left, had a bad first half, but he still put it together enough to be a 4-win player this past season in left field. He has led the league in triples 2 years in a row. He's an extra base machine. He was a 7-win player basically in 2024. He ranked, I think, 7th in Major League Baseball in WAR. So Jarren Duran has a high ceiling, 3 years left of team control in arbitration. You get Jarren Duran. For me, you stick him in center field. You put Carson Bench in right. You put Juan Soto in left, and you roll. And that is maybe the best version of the New York Mets, I think. Even in some respects, I mean, I can't say it's better than Kyle Tucker, but the difference for me is Jarren Duran, cost controlled. He makes, I think, $8 million this upcoming season. They already agreed on the actually might be in a shade below that. They already agreed on the arbitration number. It's 3 years of control through arbitration instead of Kyle Tucker being a 10-year contract or Cody Bellinger being a 6-year contract for a 30-year-old. And you're basically just getting into the same amount of years left that you had on Nimmo, probably even maybe an extra year. Maybe he gets that 6th year for a guy in his 30s. Could he age better? Probably. Less injury history. But Jarren Duran would make a lot of sense for the New York Mets. And so I think these are some of the names that we're going to be talking about now. And that's the one fun thing about this trade. There's now a whole world of topics that get opened up on things that we get to talk about on this show, because this does give the Mets a lot of different options that they can go with, a lot of different ways that they can play this offseason. I think that's part of why they liked making this move. It freed them up. It frees them up to really be in the outfield market. They still have first base open, so there's still options there. Theoretically, they could always trade Brett Beatty and open up third base if they decided, oh, we want Alex Bregman. I don't think they're going to go that route, but they just have a lot at their disposal right now that they can do, a lot of different ways that they can go about it. And I'm really curious to see what they ultimately land on. This is a trade that right now the grade's incomplete. On the surface, when the move was first made, I didn't love it because I'm a Mets fan. And I've watched Brandon Nimmo's entire career, and I imagine him playing his entire career in a Mets uniform. But Marcus Semien is an upgrade at second base over what you had. Semien and Lindor at the middle makes you a better defensive team, which was one of the goals of this offseason. What the Mets do to replace Brandon Nimmo's bat is going to determine if this was a good trade or not. If they make a good addition, if they get Bellinger, if they trade for Duran, even if they traded for Wilyer Abreu from the Red Sox and put that Gold Glove in right field and have Bench in center, However they decided to go about it, if they get a bat that can give them close to the production of Nimmo, who's a better defender in the outfield, this team got better. If they strike out in the outfield market and Jeff McNeil is your opening day left fielder, then this might have been a mistake. And that's sort of how we have to look at it at this point until we get more information, until more moves are made. But the New York Mets just became a lot more interesting this offseason. They just shook up their core, and they got a new second baseman in Marcus Semien that we can look forward to playing great defense out of the middle of Lindor for the next couple of years. That's it. That's what we got on this trade right now. On tomorrow's show, we're going to spend some time on Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger, and who knows, maybe Jarren Duran will get his own show. I still figure out exactly how I'm going to go about looking at the options the Mets have. Maybe there's some more outfielders that I didn't even think about that could now make more sense for the Mets since they're suddenly in the market to maybe add one or two this offseason. That's going to be all, though, again, for this edition of Locked On Mets. Really do appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be Locked On Mets Insider and be part of our texting service, you can find a link in the episode description. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.